7 minutes ago, the palace ended weeks of careful silence with an announcement that no one inside the royal household could ignore. Princess and has officially assumed Queen Camilla's role as the monarchy's principal female representative at major state occasions. It was not described as a temporary arrangement, a scheduling adjustment, or a private family matter. Instead, it was presented as a firm royal decision, and the emotional impact began long before the announcement had even circulated beyond the palace walls. Before we examine what this truly means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an update. Camilla remained motionless. When the final notice arrived in her private sitting room, she read the statement twice, lowered the page, and quietly asked the aide whether Charles had personally approved every word. The aide offered no reply. That silence struck harder than any answer because Buckingham Palace, the monarch's central working headquarters, had not revealed a simple diary alteration. It had confirmed that and would now represent Camilla at diplomatic receptions, ceremonial banquets, remembrance services, and selected overseas engagements, and received the decision during a separate briefing and showed no sign of celebration. She closed the official folder, rested both hands on the table, and simply said she would fulfill the responsibility but would never seek to humiliate anyone in the process. The Princess Royal understood why the decision carried such importance. State events are formal occasions where the Crown represents Britain before foreign leaders, senior officials, military figures, and the public. The person selected to lead them is not merely occupying a seat. That individual is being entrusted with rank, access, authority, and the confidence of the monarchy. Charles knew the wording would deeply affect his wife. The announcement mentioned no illness, retirement, or temporary absence, leaving no gentle explanation behind which she could shield herself. It made the message unmistakably clear. This was about confidence, not convenience. Worse still, the revised schedule for upcoming state occasions had already been finalized before Camilla received her personal notification. Names had been updated, responsibilities had been reassigned, and invitations were already moving through palace offices. Reversing the decision would now require a public reversal and expose the division the household had desperately tried to contain. Camilla folded the notice and quietly placed it beside her without lifting her eyes. Across the palace network, the news spread rapidly, and remained reserved, fully aware that accepting the responsibility could make her appear ambitious, while refusing it might weaken the crown. Meanwhile, the king prepared to face the woman beside him while carrying a decision that bore his authority, though perhaps not entirely his own design. The announcement revealed the change, but the deeper wound could only be understood by looking at the three people now caught inside it, and Camilla, and the king forced to stand between them. Behind the formal language stood three individuals carrying three completely different versions of the same betrayal, and saw duty arriving without invitation. Camilla saw her public identity being dismantled piece by piece. Charles saw a decision intended to protect the monarchy threatening to fracture the closest relationships around him. No crown, title, or official statement could soften what each of them understood. One woman was being elevated because another was no longer considered the right person to stand where she once had, and had spent decades establishing herself as the monarchy's most dependable working royal. The Princess Royal, a title traditionally given to the monarch's eldest daughter, had earned her reputation through relentless service, demanding schedules, and an unwavering belief that duty mattered more than applause. She had never depended on ceremony to prove her value. Camilla's path had been very different. State appearances had become proof that she had survived rejection, scandal, and years of public criticism to earn a respected place beside Charles. Losing those occasions did not feel like losing work. It felt like losing the final confirmation that she had truly been accepted. Camilla sat with Charles after the announcement, but she did not raise her voice. She did not accuse him of cruelty. Instead, she quietly asked whether the palace now believed and appeared more dependable standing beside him. The king opened his mouth, then hesitated. That brief pause answered more than words ever could. He attempted to explain that the decision was about stability, not affection. But Camilla heard only the truth beneath those carefully chosen words. When the institution had been forced to decide, it had chosen his sister, and carried her own unease home to Timothy Lawrence. Her husband listened as she admitted that replacing Camilla felt less like a promotion and more like entering a room where every chair had already been overturned. Timothy reminded her that she had not created the crisis. Even so, and understood that accepting the role would still make her part of it. She could perform every responsibility flawlessly and still be blamed for another woman's humiliation. William's role made the situation even more painful. The prince had supported a review of state representation, a formal assessment of who should carry the monarchy's most significant public responsibilities, because he believed private entitlement could never outweigh public confidence. The future king argued that credibility depended upon reliability. Charles had not initiated that review, but he had allowed it to continue. His approval meant he was no helpless observer. He had opened the very door through which Camilla was now being removed, and felt the burden of that reality. Camilla felt the sting of it. Charles could no longer escape it. Yet their pain was only the surface of a much older fracture, one born during a ceremonial occasion where a single refusal permanently changed how the palace viewed them all. To understand why Charles ultimately accepted the unthinkable, the story must return to the exact moment Camilla made a decision that and the palace could no longer overlook. The decision did not begin with a memo, a rivalry, or a whispered disagreement behind palace doors. It began during the Commonwealth Unity reception at St. James's Palace, when a foreign delegation arrived expecting reassurance after a diplomatic dispute. Camilla had been scheduled to lead the royal welcome, and was present only in a supporting role. Yet just minutes before the doors opened, Camilla declined to proceed under the agreed arrangements. What happened next would later be remembered inside the palace as the true turning point. Camilla had been selected to deliver the opening address because the reception carried significance far beyond ceremony. The Commonwealth Unity reception was a formal gathering designed to ease tensions between visiting representatives after a disagreement over diplomatic protocol, meaning the rules that govern official greetings, rank, timing, and conduct. Every minute mattered. Every gesture carried importance, and had been assigned a later responsibility, greeting military and charitable delegates after the main welcome concluded. Camilla's expression changed the moment she reviewed the final receiving order. Anne's position had been moved ahead of one of Camilla's closest household guests, and she immediately viewed the alteration as a public slight. She informed the organizers that she would not enter until the original order was restored. The Queen Consort insisted she would not be treated as a decorative figure during an event she had been asked to lead. As the delegation waited, she remained firm, convinced that yielding in that moment would permanently weaken her standing, and entered the adjoining room without photographers or aides following behind. She listened as Camilla accused palace staff of quietly diminishing her authority, then and responded with the same blunt honesty that had defined her entire life. She said hundreds of guests should not be left waiting while two royal women argued over who walked through a doorway first. Camilla stiffened. She told the Princess Royal that duty was easy to preach when no one was attempting to erase her place. Charles received the warning only after the delay had already become a serious concern. Before the king could step in, and walked into the reception, delivered the welcome without prepared notes, and restored order. She addressed the diplomatic dispute directly, praised cooperation, and guided the program forward with such confidence that most guests never realized a crisis had unfolded. The real damage survived only on paper. A confidential post-event assessment, a private report reviewing what had gone wrong and how future risks should be handled, praised Anne's composure while warning that Camilla's refusal had created a significant diplomatic vulnerability. William later included that document in a broader review of state event responsibilities, making the incident impossible to dismiss as nothing more than an isolated emotional moment. Camilla eventually discovered that Anne's unscripted intervention had become the strongest evidence used against her. She did not blame the committee. She blamed the woman who had walked through the doorway she herself had refused to cross. The reception ended without public embarrassment, but its private consequences waited behind a closed door where Anne and Camilla would finally confront each other without ceremony standing between them. There were no aides, no cameras, and no carefully prepared statements when Camilla asked Anne to meet her. Only two chairs, a sealed copy of the palace announcement, and years of restrained resentment filled the room between them. Camilla did not accuse Anne of ambition. Her accusation was far more painful. She claimed the Princess Royal had allowed duty to become a weapon, and listened without interrupting until Camilla mentioned Charles and suggested he had been influenced by his own sister. Camilla had chosen a private room at Clarence House because she refused to let their relationship be reduced to official correspondence and second-hand explanations. Clarence House, the London residence of the King and Queen Consort, no longer felt like a royal home. Instead, it felt like a place where rank had finally lost its protection, and arrived shortly before her first scheduled appearance under the revised arrangement, and found the official announcement already waiting between them. Camilla slid the document across the table and quietly asked whether Anne had known she was being considered as a permanent replacement. The Queen Consort kept her voice calm, but the hurt beneath it was unmistakable, and replied that she had been aware a review was taking place, but she had not seen its final recommendation until Charles approved it. Camilla studied her closely before asking whether that was supposed to make the betrayal feel any smaller, and remained silent as the accusation intensified. Camilla said the Princess Royal had always been allowed to remain above palace politics while everyone else suffered beneath them. She accused and of stepping into every crisis, appearing disciplined, and leaving others to carry the blame. Only then did and answer. She said completing responsibilities that others had abandoned was not the same as creating the abandonment itself. The words landed with devastating force. Camilla slowly rose from her chair. She claimed and had turned one unsuccessful reception into proof that she could no longer be trusted, and responded that 2 future diplomatic engagements were already facing possible cancellation because no senior royal had accepted clear responsibility. She then revealed something Camilla had never known, and had initially refused the expanded role and had agreed only after palace officials warned that the crown could face another public failure. Camilla's anger slowly turned into something colder. If and had refused once, then Charles must have approached her before the official decision had been announced. The truth became impossible to ignore. Her husband and his sister had discussed Camilla's future while she still believed her own position was secure, and did not deny it. She simply said the decision had never started with her, without another word, and left the room. Camilla watched the door close and realized that the real authority had never been sitting across from her. It was contained within the documents Charles had allowed William to prepare. Their confrontation released years of hidden resentment, but it also revealed the person whose judgment had quietly transformed frustration into policy, and policy into an irreversible royal decision. Royal power rarely arrives through raised voices. Sometimes it appears as nothing more than a single signature beneath carefully written words that seem calm on the surface. Charles sat alone with the final recommendation before him, fully aware that approving it would weaken his wife's position while strengthening his sister's. William's review was direct. The advisor's warnings were unmistakable. Yet the pen remained untouched for several long minutes because the king understood that once his signature reached the page, the decision would no longer belong to committees, courtiers, or circumstance. It would belong entirely to him. Charles had authorized William to oversee a formal operational review after repeated concerns about preparation, attendance, and the monarchy's ability to guarantee senior representation at major engagements. An operational review was a structured assessment of how royal responsibilities were assigned and whether those arrangements continued to serve the institution effectively. William could recommend changes, but he could not enforce them. Only the monarch possessed the authority to redistribute state responsibilities, meaning every consequence now rested with one man. Charles reread the paragraph removing Camilla from automatic priority at designated state occasions. He removed his glasses, pressed his fingers against his eyes, and quietly asked his private secretary whether softer wording would change the practical outcome. The answer was simple. No. Camilla would still lose first claim to the ceremonies that had once confirmed her position beside him. Gentler language might lessen the initial shock, but it could never disguise the truth. William entered shortly afterward and chose his words with care. The future king argued that protecting Camilla from embarrassment could not come before protecting the crown from another failed engagement. Charles heard the reasoning, but beneath it, he also heard judgment. His son was not simply discussing schedules. He was saying that personal affection had already been allowed to outweigh duty for far too long. The king reminded William that institutions did not experience humiliation in private. People did. William did not step back. Instead, he pointed to the decisive clause granting and standing authority rather than temporary substitution. Standing authority meant she would hold continuing responsibility and could not quietly be removed whenever tensions eased. That single clause made the decision stable, unmistakable, and almost impossible to reverse without exposing weakness inside the palace. Charles lifted the pen, then paused once again. Finally, he added one handwritten condition. Camilla would retain selected charitable appearances and private ceremonial patronages. The personal causes and honorary roles she could continue supporting without leading the monarchy's principal state occasions. It was not restoration. It was the smallest protection he could still offer to preserve her dignity. At last, the pen touched the page. William watched his father complete the signature, and Charles knew the debate had ended on paper. But paper could never contain grief. Camilla would now have to witness the revised order become reality at the first major state event held without her. The king's signature settled the argument inside the palace. Yet the first public implementation would reveal whether Camilla could endure watching and occupy the position that had once symbolized her own acceptance beside Charles. The new reality arrived not with another announcement, but with an empty chair. At the first diplomatic banquet held under the revised arrangement, Anne's name appeared beside the king's on the final seating plan. Camilla's had disappeared. She remained inside Clarence House while the program began, fully dressed for an evening she would no longer attend. Across London, and prepared to enter the ballroom, knowing every step forward would be interpreted as a step taken from someone else. Camilla had chosen the gown weeks earlier, long before the palace confirmed her removal. The Northern Alliance State Banquet was a formal dinner held to honor visiting leaders and strengthen diplomatic relationships, making it the first major public test of Anne's expanded authority. The seating plan positioned the Princess Royal beside Charles during the reception and assigned her the conversations Camilla had once managed. Those details mattered because proximity to the monarch symbolized trust, influence, and rank before every guest in attendance. Camilla stood before the mirror when final confirmation arrived that no last-minute invitation would come. She removed one bracelet, placed it beside the printed program, and quietly instructed her dresser to put everything away. The Queen Consort kept her voice steady, yet the instruction carried the weight of a farewell. She had spent years earning a place beside Charles. Now the palace was proving that it could remove that place without removing her title. Anne paused before entering the banquet and quietly told Timothy Lawrence that she felt no sense of triumph. Her husband reminded her that refusing now would transform duty into spectacle and deepen Camilla's humiliation. The Princess Royal understood. She could not protect one woman by embarrassing the crown before foreign leaders. Yet she also knew every successful moment would make the judgment against Camilla appear even harsher. Charles greeted the guests with practiced composure, but his attention briefly drifted toward the place his wife would once have occupied. And noticed the hesitation. She lowered her voice, smoothly redirected the conversation, and engaged a visiting minister before anyone sensed the king's distraction. He quickly recovered, but the brief moment revealed how deeply the new arrangement had entered their private lives. The evening unfolded without delay, confusion, or visible tension, and handled every responsibility with confidence. Charles completed the program without interruption. Ironically, that success became the harshest verdict of all because it demonstrated that the palace could function, and perhaps even function more efficiently, without Camilla at the center of the ceremony. Charles did not return immediately to Clarence House. Instead, the king asked his sister to remain after the final guest had departed, and recognized the seriousness in his voice and stayed behind. The banquet had proved the new structure could succeed. But only after the doors closed did Charles finally admit to and what he had never been able to confess to Camilla, or even to himself. When the final guest departed, Charles asked everyone else to leave. No secretaries remained. No advisors waited outside the door, and no official record would ever preserve what followed. The king and his sister stood alone after an evening that had confirmed Anne's authority and Camilla's absence. Charles thanked Anne for saving the event, and did not accept the praise. Instead, she asked the one question no one else dared to place before him. Had he made the decision as monarch, or had he simply surrendered to it as a frightened husband? Charles looked away before answering. For the first time, they were no longer discussing practical reasoning. They were confronting the emotional cost of the replacement. Their shared history made the silence even heavier. For years Anne had protected her brother through action rather than comfort, stepping forward whenever pressure threatened to overwhelm him. The Princess Royal had rarely asked for recognition, yet the king had often depended upon her steadiness without acknowledging the burden she quietly carried. Charles finally admitted that he had delayed the decision because he knew Camilla would experience it as rejection by the family she had spent years trying to enter. The Queen Consort had survived public hostility, private suspicion, and constant comparison. He feared that removing her from state events would confirm every insecurity she had struggled to leave behind. He confessed that he had wanted more time, believing delay might somehow produce a kinder outcome, and did not soften the reality. She quietly told him that postponing a necessary decision had not protected Camilla. It had only allowed her to believe in a security that no longer existed. Charles accepted the criticism without defending himself. He knew his sister was right. By trying to avoid pain, he had only made the eventual wound far deeper. Then Charles admitted something even more unsettling. During their private conversation, he revealed that after signing the final order, he had seriously considered withdrawing his approval. The king had nearly reversed everything. But the flawless banquet changed his mind. Watching and manage the evening convinced him that retreat would place personal guilt ahead of institutional responsibility. The monarchy had functioned successfully. That truth could no longer be ignored. And agreed to remain in the role, but only under one condition. Charles had to tell Camilla personally that his sister had never campaigned for the position, never influenced the review, and never sought her removal. The Princess Royal refused to allow silence to turn her into the villain of a decision the king himself had made. If the truth caused greater pain, then Charles would have to carry that burden himself. Shortly before midnight, Charles returned to Clarence House without a prepared speech. Camilla was waiting. She did not ask whether the decision would be reversed. Instead, she quietly asked what remained of her life inside the monarchy now that its grandest stages no longer belonged to her. Anne's condition forced Charles to abandon comforting half-truths, and the honesty that followed prepared the palace for a public reaction far more powerful than anyone had expected. By sunrise, the palace's decision no longer belonged solely to the royal family. It now belonged to broadcasters, newspaper editors, crowds, critics, and millions of people deciding what Anne's elevation truly represented. Some viewed it as discipline replacing privilege. Others believed it showed a wife being publicly abandoned by the husband who had once defied the world for her. Yet one image overshadowed every argument. Anne stepped from the state car alone, composed and unsmiling, while the place traditionally associated with Camilla remained unmistakably empty. Britain awoke to a story that had slipped beyond palace control. National broadcasters interrupted regular programming as newspapers rushed out special editions, questioning whether the change represented stability or punishment. Palace communications insisted the revised arrangement would protect continuity, meaning the Crown could guarantee that a trusted senior royal would always attend its most important public responsibilities. But official wording could not contain the wider debate. The decision had become a judgment on reliability, marriage, loyalty, and whether years of personal sacrifice could survive the loss of institutional confidence. Camilla watched the morning coverage with Charles sitting beside her. When the presenter described Anne as the monarchy's safest pair of hands, the words landed with quiet cruelty. The Queen Consort switched off the television and softly remarked that safety was apparently the one quality the palace believed she could never provide. Charles tried to explain that public praise for his sister did not erase Camilla's years of service. But she replied that comparison had already accomplished exactly that, and watched the same broadcast from her office and reacted not with pride, but with frustration. The Princess Royal instructed her staff not to circulate flattering headlines, celebrate opinion polls, or respond to criticism aimed at Camilla. She understood that every headline celebrating her success made another woman's loss appear like public entertainment. Duty had brought her authority. Public admiration threatened to turn that duty into humiliation. One newspaper captured the national divide with remarkable simplicity. Its front page carried the headline, "The Crown turns to and," alongside a photograph of her entering the banquet, while a smaller image showed Camilla leaving a church service only days earlier. Outside Buckingham Palace, the monarch's principal official residence and administrative headquarters, crowds gathered near the gates. One woman held a handwritten sign reading, "Duty has a name, and." Nearby, another visitor placed flowers beneath a note expressing sympathy for Camilla. Charles watched admiration slowly harden into judgment, and watched support transform into triumphalism. Camilla watched complete strangers debate whether her pain had been deserved. The public reaction confirmed that the Princess Royal possessed widespread confidence, but it did not answer the question of what the decision would ultimately mean for the woman who had been replaced. With the country already delivering its verdict, Camilla faced the only choice still completely within her control: whether to resist her diminished role, or redefine it in a way the palace had never expected. The final outcome was not reconciliation in the easy sense, nor was it victory for one woman over another, and remained the Crown's principal female representative at major state events. Camilla did not regain the position that had been taken from her. Charles never withdrew his signature. Yet within that painful certainty, each of them ultimately made a final choice, and chose service without celebration. Charles chose responsibility without pretending it came without personal cost. Camilla chose to leave the struggle for ceremonial status behind, and retained standing responsibility for the designated state program, meaning she now held continuing authority over the principal diplomatic and ceremonial duties entrusted to her. Camilla continued selected charitable, community, and personally significant engagements away from the central diplomatic schedule. The monarchy gradually settled into a divided model. The Princess Royal represented discipline and institutional continuity at major occasions, while the Queen Consort focused on causes where her contribution no longer depended upon ceremonial precedence. Charles eventually told Camilla the complete truth during a private conversation at Clarence House, and had never requested the position. She had initially declined it. The king explained that his sister accepted only after palace officials warned that future engagements could fail without clear leadership. Camilla listened quietly without interruption. Then she admitted that although the truth could not remove the pain, it stopped her from directing her resentment toward the wrong person. Later, Camilla requested one final private meeting with Anne. She confessed that watching and stand beside Charles had felt like watching the palace erase years of sacrifice with a single decision, and did not dismiss her feelings. Instead, the Princess Royal gently replied that no seating arrangement could erase survival, but neither could past sacrifices guarantee a future position. Camilla understood the distinction. Acceptance did not require pretending the loss had been fair. It simply meant refusing to let that loss define everything that followed. Camilla removed the official state event calendar from her desk and replaced it with plans for literacy programs and domestic abuse initiatives. Those initiatives focused on promoting reading and supporting people affected by violence within the home. The gesture represented acceptance, not surrender. She was choosing purpose over status, and attended the next state reception without celebration, while Charles publicly thanked both women for serving the crown in different ways. But it recognized the human cost of the decision. The final verdict was unmistakable. The modern monarchy had chosen reliability over sentiment, and became its unwavering symbol of duty. Camilla preserved her dignity after authority slipped away. Charles protected the institution, but could not protect everyone he loved from the consequences. The hierarchy had been settled. The wound had been acknowledged, and the monarchy emerged steadier, sadder, and permanently changed. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.